Hi everyone, this is Teresa Murphy. I will be talking today about higher education as job preparation, an examination of the America Competes Act. The America Competes Act was a House of Representatives proposal for STEM research and education and technology transfer support from the federal government. And so this is an interesting policy to consider because while it incorporates lots of aspects of higher education across lots of different sections, it is at its heart a policy that revolves around science, technology, math, and engineering applications within the United States and supporting those in order to further our economic development and make sure that we are remaining competitive globally. This 2022 passage of the Act was a reauthorization of previous bills in 2007 and 2010. And although I'm exploring this original policy proposal of the America Competes Act, it did get signed into law as the CHIPS and Science Act by President Biden in 2022. So the finalized version of this law is not exactly the same as the House of Representatives proposed policy that I'm exploring today. This policy really is a STEM workforce development policy, or at least that is what it claims to be. The main problem with this policy is the public and government assumptions of the purpose of higher education and how that's reflected within the inclusions of the policy, who gets funding and who doesn't, even the way that various additions are talked about within the policy and the language that is used. This is because, as we've been reading all semester, there are a lot of different purposes that people believe higher education is meant to serve. And there are also various systems in which higher education functions that do not necessarily align with the public and the government's expectations of how higher education should work. So the upstream assumption within this policy is that the purpose of higher education is for job preparation. That's why the Act as a whole is focused on, STEM workforce preparation. And within this slide, I've provided a quote from the introduction of a different bill that has kind of similar focus. And you can see throughout this bill, throughout former bills around job preparation, the people who are creating the policies, signing the bills into laws, really hold this belief that the purpose of higher education is to prepare students for jobs. So here the quote is, with 6 million unfilled jobs and over $1 trillion in student debt, simply reauthorizing the Higher Education Act will not help. A hard truth that students, families, and institutions must face is that the promise of post-secondary education is broken. The promise in this case being getting a job. We need a higher education system that is designed to meet the needs of today's students and has the flexibility to innovate for tomorrow's workforce opportunities. So, as we've explored throughout weeks 1 and 2, and into later weeks in the semester, there are myriad purposes for higher education, and this mentality of the purpose of higher education, this assumption of expectation of job preparation, really does guide how this act has been put into place, what provisions they include, what expectations they have. So particularly for this policy, there are some pros. The pros mainly are around research and STEM education funding. The fact that higher education appears across many different sections of this policy proposal shows that the government still sees a value in higher education in helping us to remain globally relevant, to continue to produce scientific research that will keep the US at the forefront of development and globalization. Uh, the funding for research also benefits particularly STEM students who are able to experience not only the research experience, but also some of the socialization and knowledge specialization that comes with that experience. There also is funding for STEM education programs, though the details around that are kind of vague and leave some space to, you know, expand and have individual institutions be able to address their own needs. But that vagueness really does become the main con of this policy. So this policy, both as I was exploring it and after it had been produced, people who were experts in higher education noticed similar cons of a lack of focus on the practical career development aspects of this policy. For a policy that purports to be all about STEM workforce development, there is very little in the way of practical support, advice, expectations around how to actually prepare STEM students to be competitive in the various workforce roles that they may be trying to get. The policy gives a lot of money to training, but it does not focus on anything like transferable skills or really doesn't give even that much guidance around professional development programs and career support focus prioritizes those aspects, particularly for STEM students, because those are places where STEM students need support. In addition to that overarching critique of there really not being enough career development focus within this workforce development goal, neither the Department of Education nor the Department of Labor were directly funded through this policy. Instead, most of the funding went to the National Science Foundation, who then distributed it in grants, scholarships, programs, etc. So while the National Science Foundation, being an established program in which these research scientists across the country are already familiar, can be seen as a positive, this lack of support for the Department of Labor, the workforce department, shows that there is kind of a lack of nuanced understanding of what workforce development actually entails. And a critique that I had, particularly when considering how to employ STEM education for workforce development, was that it seems as if there's also a lack of understanding around academia. Within this document, there's a lot of focus on throwing money at various programs, but there really does not seem to be any focus on faculty buy-in around the workforce development aspects of this policy. And so that can really be seen as a major con because students who are attending the university, particularly minoritized students or underrepresented students who are the groups of students that this policy specifically names as people that they want to support. Um, those students in particular seek support and information from the people that they see every day on campus, which can be peers, student support staff, and in particular, faculty members. So the faculty buy-in for really impactful workforce development involves faculty buy-in for career support. And I think it's important to identify that sometimes these career programs do work. For an example is the BEST program, which is in place at MSU and supports professional development for biomedical science and engineering students. But this program works on individual levels, but the original funding from the National Institute of Health, which was given as a grant, is no longer available, particularly because the people who were implementing it on the university level understood academia and faculty motivations and things like that, and were able to find buy-in at their institutions. So my policy proposal is don't really make a whole lot of changes because the NSF funding system is something that is already in place. This act will be reauthorized in 2027. And so I think that really we want to focus the funding aspects on faculty purposes that will excite them to get buy into career preparation and workforce development, namely research funding, and provide research funding for faculty members, small amounts of it, in order to incorporate career development into the curriculum. In that way, we are getting faculty buy-in to have the actual career preparation support that will be impactful and beneficial to students. And we are not changing anything too much, so faculty are not disturbed. The academic units are able to use that money for the individual faculty incentives, and if not, use it at the department level to ensure that there is still a career service offering to provide that not just workforce development, but career development that is needed to have a strong STEM workforce.